Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Rockefeller Center, welcome to tonight's event. We couldn't be prouder to bring you Sadhana Hall, the Deputy Director of the Rockefeller Center. She'll be sharing the lessons she's learned and taught in her years working with students. Before we get started, a couple of Zoom details. Chat and Q&A are open. You can ask your questions at any time. If you want to upvote a question, click the thumbs up icon and that will raise that question to the top of the heap. There will be a slideshow tonight. To see both the slide and the speaker, which of course we know you'll want to do, find the view options button and click on side-by-side view. You can change the size of the slides by hovering your pointer over the divider between the two and dragging it back and forth. Before we get started, we have a couple of questions we'd like to ask you. Nothing scientific. We just want to learn a little bit more about the people who are in the room and what's making you tick. So if you'll just take a second, it won't take long to answer these two questions. Here you go. I'll give you a second or two. Oh, almost half of you have answered. Let's see if we can get this response rate a little bit higher. I've got all night. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for answering. Let's see what we've learned about each other. We've got some Dartmouth students. We've got a third of our audience currently is faculty, staff, or leadership educator. We've got almost half of the audience is Dartmouth alum. Welcome home. We've got community members. We've got, not surprisingly, a fair amount of people who work for nonprofit organizations, some current students, and some undefined folks making an appearance. Thank you all for participating. That's great info for us to have. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Jason Barabas, the director of the Rockefeller Center. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Joanne, and welcome to everybody. Welcome for another edition of the Rocky Watch Talk in the fall of 2021. This one dives into the inner workings of the leadership programming at the Rockefeller Center. And for those who do not know this already, the Rockefeller Center provides students with opportunities to develop their civic capacity and leadership skills. More than a quarter of the students enrolled at Dartmouth take part in our signature programs and seminars throughout the year. And these would not have been possible without the generous donors and staff who are involved in making these programs happen. Now, I'm relatively new to the Rockefeller Center, and much of the programming that I just mentioned was developed by two people with longstanding ties to Rocky. The first is Sadhana Hall, and she's the main speaker tonight. She's also the deputy director at Rocky, and you're going to hear much more about her in a moment. But the other person I would like to give credit to is our past director, Professor Andrew Samwick, and it is my honor to introduce him. The few minutes that I've been given are not enough to cover his illustrious career, but here are a few key highlights. He is the Sandra and Arthur L. Irving Professor of Economics, and he currently chairs the Department of Economics at Dartmouth. He's been at Dartmouth since 1994, after he completed his PhD at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Along the way, he has become an international expert in many different fields, including the economics of retirement, savings, taxation, executive compensation. He served on the National Bureau of Economic Research, the Census Scientific Advisory Committee, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, and many other illustrious institutions, including the President's Council of Economic Advisors in the mid-2000s, where he served as the chief economist. Samwick led the Rockefeller Center as its director from 2004 to 2019, and so much of the 2021 Rockefeller Center today is due to the decisions that he's made, and also the key decision, which was to hire Sadhana Hall. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Samwick to introduce our main speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for that kind introduction and for your direction of the Rockefeller Center during very challenging times. The academic enterprise at Dartmouth focuses on the creation and the dissemination of knowledge. And maybe in an ideal world, that would be enough. but you can look around to nearly every part of our global society and see problems that have known solutions, and also witness that the problems persist for want of the ability to translate knowledge into socially beneficial outcomes. That ability is a good working definition of leadership, and its scarcity in our present time is sorely felt. I was fortunate to direct for many years an academic center which has as a critical element of its mission to develop undergraduates' potential for leadership. As we built programming to achieve that mission, we encountered at Dartmouth and in the wider world of academia 4 troubling obstacles. First, there were empty assertions from those in positions of authority that, quote, leadership is in everything we do. They were unable or unwilling to specify how or why this was true. I found it a bit galling. If you are an educator and you claim to be doing something, you should be able to specify the pedagogy and the curriculum for how you are doing it. Neither was forthcoming, and that inertia was the first obstacle. Second, we encountered puzzling assertions that, quote, you cannot teach leadership, with the implication that individuals either have leadership qualities or they don't. I don't doubt that some people are more predisposed to leading than others are, but I could never figure out why, among all human endeavors, leadership should be the one that is resistant to education, regardless of an individual's innate abilities. This obstacle made no sense either, except perhaps as a self-serving excuse to ignore reality and the urgent need for better leadership. Third, we were confronted by a lack of urgency in teaching leadership, stemming from a view that only some people will wind up in leadership positions, and that when they do, they can acquire the skills they need from a retinue of coaches and advisors. There is a leadership industry, about which more later, that serves this purpose. But it seems like we've forgotten the old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. More importantly, this obstacle misses a fundamental point about leadership, in that it is a reflection of actions taken rather than positions occupied. With the proper training, everyone can lead, and they can lead from anywhere. Fourth, in the wider world, there have been some utterly pedestrian efforts to write books about leadership. You find them in airport gift shops and other similar places. They have the same value as generic get-rich-quick schemes, purporting to establish general principles from a few anecdotes written by talented, but also very lucky people. The obstacle here is that it is very hard for new, authentic work to be heard above the din of this idle chatter. Our featured speaker this evening, Sadhana Hall, has spent the last 16 years at the Rockefeller Center systematically dismantling each of these obstacles. She has designed and implemented a suite of leadership programs that engage about a third of Dartmouth undergraduates at some point in their 4 years here. Student and partner testimonials attest to their value. External validation is also provided in that these experiences are intimately related to the ability of some of our best students to win national and international honors. In her 2 books, Teaching Leadership, co-authored with our dear friend, the late Gamma Perucci, and now Leadership Blueprints, Sadhana has marshaled her insights and experiences as a scholar and practitioner to produce a pedagogy and a curriculum to make them accessible to all students, regardless of the backgrounds they bring to the table, and to do so in a rigorous and comprehensive manner. For educators who have themselves been stymied by the 4 obstacles I previously described, you now have the roadmap available, both what to teach and how to do it. This roadmap is a singular achievement, the latest milestone in Sadhana's career that began with community development, both domestically and around the world in areas such as Tuvalu, Armenia, and Bhutan. Her work is informed by the academic training she received while earning master's degrees, first in history from the University of Rajasthan and in public health from the University of North Carolina. In her time at the Rockefeller Center, where she serves as deputy director, she has received several honors, including the college's Sheila Colbert Distinguished Employee Service Award, the Australian government's Endeavour Executive Leadership Award, and acceptance into the Fulbright Specialist Program. It has been an honor to collaborate with her over her many years at Dartmouth. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sadhana Hall.
Andrew, Jason, thank you so much for this incredible introduction. And Andrew, it's been an honor to work with you for the 15 years. And together with Ron, really, we built a really great suite of leadership programs, of which I'm extremely, extremely proud. But you cannot do these programs just by yourself. And so I do give a shout out to the team that always is behind these programs and running all the detailed stuff that we have to do. The devil is in the detail, my friends. Pay close attention. Leadership is for everyone and is for everything. So let me just talk a little bit about leadership, broad concepts of leadership. The book really is not the focus of this discussion. Leadership is about you and it's not about you. And this time, in this particular session, we are going to talk about leadership and how it shows up in different situations. So when I think about leadership and you look at the book, I'll just say a few things about it. One is that it has a bunch of concepts, standalone chapters that talk about concepts related to leadership. But the cool thing is that it has chapters from 3 to 7, the 5 programs that we have developed with our blood, sweat, and tears. It has the blueprints. So you adopt, adapt, adjust away. So there's a larger concept related to that. And Laura, let's go to that one. There are leadership theories, thousands of leadership theories, but most of them fall under the bucket of self-awareness, teamwork, organizational to achieve societal good, in which our programs really focus on them. So moving to the next slide, let me show you how it really falls together. Listen, we need to be self-aware. Leadership is about you. It starts with you. It begins with you. But we also need to understand how it fits into a team and how that team fits into an organization. So you can see the connections. It's like a puzzle and you have to put it together in your mind. So self-awareness, teamwork, organization, and how you meet societal good and your organizational mission becomes really important. So I don't want to spend more time about this. These are some of the broad concepts about leadership that I want to talk to you about. And I would be remiss if I said, I want to tell you how great these programs are. I think we have to, as a community, acknowledge what these programs have done for us. So Amrita and Ben, I talked to you recently about your leadership experiences and your work experiences, and you were so excited about the leadership programs. So why don't you talk about them for a minute?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ben. In undergrad, I first started in the first year fellows program, so got inundated right away with Rocky, and then also ended my career at Dartmouth with the RLF program, the Rocky Leadership Fellows. And those were so important for me coming out of college. Within a year of graduating, I found myself actually managing a team of 8 folks. And when you have less than a year of working experience, you have very little experience to rely on when you're managing folks. So what did I turn to? I turned to all the concepts that I had learned in those 2 programs: how to be professional, how to communicate, how to be empathetic with reports who were also fresh out of college. In my current role, I transitioned to the federal government, and now I talk with constituents every day. And you have to be a strong communicator. You have to be very empathetic. You have to be firm, and you're working in challenging multi-stakeholder environments. And I cannot imagine going into this work without having a very strong fundamental concepts of leadership that were also applied throughout the program. We constantly, we're diving into examples and ways we can actually apply those best practices. And those were fundamental to where I am today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name is Amrita Sankar. I mean, if leadership is a blueprint, Sadhana is an architect extraordinaire. I feel so grateful to have met Sadhana and Professor Shaiko and the whole Rocky team when I was coming to Dartmouth for Dimensions. And like Ben, I participated in first-year fellows my freshman year, RLF, Rockefeller Leadership Fellows my senior year, and MLDP, or Management and Leadership Development Program, my sophomore year. You know, what I can fondly say 10 years coming on my 10-year Dartmouth reunion is that I really think Rocky gave me three things. First, it gave me the experiences to absorb new ways of seeing the world through the construct of teamwork, through engaging in a plethora of experiences where I could understand what societal good really was and how could I be an agent of change. The second is, I think, even just creating this cohort of like-minded individuals, right? College is such a time for finding yourself. It really allowed me to meet extraordinary people with similar values. And the last is empowerment to heighten my own self-awareness. I was thinking about this talk a lot today, and I think coming out of COVID, there's really been a grounding of values, right? What is my purpose in the world? How am I going to live a meaningful existence? And I think Rocky has really created an extraordinary program where when you see yourself in the context of those values, like Ben mentioned, you're better able to connect with others and you're able to create a world that you'd like to see. So thank you, Sadhana, and the whole Rocky team. We're forever indebted.
Wow, that's great. And you know, honestly, we hear often from all of you, and we ask you to do so many things. But then, you know, there's a bunch of people who have really helped to build the leadership programming. And I bring this all to all of you is because it's not just me, it's not just Andrew, it's not just our staff, it's our stakeholders, it's our speakers who do amazing work. So I invited Sonu Bedi, who's also our co-sponsor for this program, to talk about why he keeps coming back. And hello, Professor Bedi, why do you keep coming back all the time?
Such a good question. I will happily explain why. So I teach in the government department. I also direct the Ethics Institute. And since I started at Dartmouth, I think this is since 2007, without fail, every year, I have been involved in the Rockefeller Leadership Program that Sadhana directs. And the reason I come back is that every time it really has advanced my own teaching and research. And sort of, you know, part of the session is to see how leaders structure dialogue in ways that are generative rather than ones that where the conversation ends. And so that session has been central to my own teaching and research. And also, I will say this, when I became director of the Ethics Institute, we also have a co-curricular program, and you won't be surprised to learn that it is because of the Rockefeller Leadership Fellows Program that modeling the program at the Ethics Institute, looking at what Rocky does. And so the Rockefeller Center supports faculty, and it's important to see that you know, it does that both in teaching and research. And so the Leadership Fellows Program in particular, the students here that are on it, Ben, Amrita, I mean, it's so nice to engage with our undergraduate students in a context outside the classroom. And that is real sort of intellectual fun. And I will say, Sadhana, the Rockefeller Leadership Fellows Program is really where I first learned that it can be such intellectual fun. And so I really appreciate that. And that's why happy to always come back.
Sonu, I just love your program. Every single time, if you attend Professor Bedi's programs, you learn something. You learn about how to talk to someone. You learn about how to manage your differences and differences of opinion. And our world is so needs it at this point, right? So Marissa, you are a co-sponsor, and thank you so much. We have met each other, and we are talking about how we collaborate further, because leadership can be taught, and it can be taught by working with people, not only within Dartmouth, but also outside. And I'm beginning to see our broader network that started to work for us and with us. So welcome, Marissa.
Thank you so much, Sadhana. It's absolutely a delight to be with you here again today. Thank you for your leadership, your introduction. I couldn't agree more. You are clearly the architect. NSLS is the largest leadership honor society in the US and serves over 1.5 million student members who are out making a positive impact in the world. And certainly we are with you in the belief that leadership is something that can be taught. And to that end, for those students that may be listening in for today's event, if you would like to take some of those leadership skills to the next level, please check out our internship program at nsls.org/intern. And with that, thank you again, Sadhana and Rocky, for your work in building leaders who make a better world.
Thank you so much. And so RJ, I think we are ready. We are ready. We are ready to start this program. And let's look at the first thing that we think about. So I want to really start with this whole idea that management and leadership are two major concepts. And we started off with self-awareness, right, RJ? So when I look at self-awareness, I look at strengths and weaknesses. When you're thinking about self-awareness, you're thinking about what your values are and what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Values are important. They're a starting point. They build your character. And here are the values that are really important to me: integrity, honesty, transparency, and accountability. And while we are talking about values, what do you think, RJ, are your values? And please put in chat what you think your values are.
And while they're doing that, I would like to introduce myself real quick. I'm playing the host as we bring this to an end. I was lucky enough to hear Sadhana describe a lot about her book earlier and was so intrigued. I wanted to join on to her tour, her book tour, essentially, which is this next webinar. My question is, though, Sadhana, as people write what their values are, is how did you come to your choices of values? How did you choose those specific words, essentially?
Right. So thank you for asking this question. So integrity is a matter of your word, nothing more, nothing less. And I'm sure people have heard this. And, you know, this incident, an example or story happened to me many, many years ago and has stayed with me. And I found the right words for how to define integrity when somebody gave me their word many, many years ago and did not keep it. And the result of that was the death of someone. And I didn't know what that really meant. And at some point, I started thinking, when I attended a training, I could put words, a definition to the words. So I feel that when you give someone your word, you really need to keep your word. You're so out of integrity when you break your word, because when you break your word, you lose trust. When you lose your trust, you lose your credibility. And when you lose your credibility, you do not have any followers. So authenticity also plays into that.
I have a question, actually. In terms of finding out your leadership values and strengths and weaknesses, do you often sort of compare what you don't like in someone else's leadership values? For example, you mentioned that somebody broke their word, and therefore you realized that integrity was important. Is that another way to find what your strengths are, your weaknesses, or your values are?
Absolutely. And I think that we need to really start thinking about what is important to us and why, and what's non-negotiable for us and why. And what's non-negotiable for me is integrity, honesty, transparency, and accountability. We have to do these for me. So I want our group to also put in chat what is important for them.
We have a few that came in as we move on to Inner Critic is kindness, loyalty, truth, authenticity, context, and balance. That's a good one. Fairness, respect. This is a really interactive group. I'm actually glad to see this.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So it's the congruence of thoughts, words, and deeds and view. Fritz Corrigan says this. Adam is saying predictability, compassion, work
Yeah.
ethic, empathy, and grace. So we can see that everyone has a whole bunch of values that are very dear to them. And if we are working in a team, and RJ, I'm going to jump between self, team, and organization.
Mhm.
We are jumping between this. When we are clear about our values, we really need to understand how they play into teams too. So value clarification as a team is really important. So we can still see tolerance, community, and collaboration. And Alan from Australia, thank you. So can you differentiate the difference? Can you talk about integrity and difference between integrity and honesty? Good question. I think for me, integrity is your word. Honesty is something that people will always know that your word will be true at any moment. And when you are being true to your word, you are being honest. So what's your thought, RJ?
Integrity and honesty, that one specifically, I think integrity is someone who's being honest often or frequently or with a consistency. Essentially, you become you gain integrity. That's a really great differentiation. I would like to talk now about the enemy of these values, which might be the inner critic, and how to deal with that inner critic, essentially.
Okay, so I want everybody to post in chat. What do we mean when we say inner critic? So RJ, while people are posting in chat what they think is an inner critic, what do you believe to be inner critic? And things are coming in fast and furiously. This is very good. So what do you believe?
Inner critic is the irrational thought that you have, the irrational negative thought that you have prior to doing something that might be nerve-wracking or new or fresh, that you're not prepared for. It's something that tries to bring you down at a moment of possibly moving up.
Right. And so, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, RJ.
No, is that the general gist? I want to hear your answer. I think everyone wants to hear your answer. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when you are doing something and you're not certain about what you're doing, all of a sudden there's this chatter that goes on in your brain, right?
Yeah.
And that is the dark side of you. So you can look at your strengths, you can look at your weaknesses and try and address them. But that little chatter in your brain that really stops you, which says, and lots of people are saying, you're worried about how others will respond, the nemesis of your potential, like a ghost that haunts your belief.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, the self-sabotage that we do and the internal voice that inflicts self-judgment.
And how do we stop it? We all want the solution. Yeah. What are exercises we can do in order to curb our inner critic?
Right. So a lot of people in our last webinar had many suggestions. So we are going to ask them while we talk about what some of the ways might be to stop the inner critic, right?
Great.
So to build your confidence, you really need to understand that you cannot fake it till you make it. You've got to work on it till you become it. And you have to understand what is it that's making you doubt your skills, your abilities, your emotions, and your feelings. And in my mind, those people who really are able to balance these things that I've talked about are the people who are able to conquer their inner critics. So please go ahead and type up some strategies for addressing your inner critic while RJ and I talk. So RJ, what makes you stop the chatter in your brain?
Well, actually, an exercise that you suggested at the last webinar that we did together was writing down a lot of the things, the pros and cons, are essentially the things that you do really well, and also the things that you might not do well and how you could fix those things, as opposed to just a rumination of bad thoughts.
Right. And so Miriam is saying, get off social media.
Get off social media, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that many times people always think that we have to present an image of ourselves, or we worry about what people say. And studies are showing that social media really saps you.
Yeah.
It doesn't zap you. It doesn't make you comfortable with what you're doing. And so, thank you, Miriam. And so Sky is saying, identify a specific point of failure rather than sitting in shame. So yes, failure allows you to reflect on how you might be better in the future. But also, I think it's so important for you to say, why did I fail? What might I do about it? But let me say one thing. A lot of people look at why this happened. But there is a spiritual leader who I listen to sometimes, and he actually said this, which really, really resonates with me. Listen carefully, my friends. The past is just a memory. The present is now, and the future is imagination. See that?
Yeah.
We really can't do anything about our past. And there we are, we failed, we haven't done this, we haven't done that. So for leadership, why is this important? Everyone, please focus, think about this. Why is it important that you need to still your inner critic? And please put in chat why you think you need to still your inner critic.
And I would venture to say that inner critic leads us into this next part on the slide of becoming imposter syndrome. If you hear too much of your inner critic, you then assume that you aren't supposed to be there. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're not supposed to be there, but also, people think you're good and you don't think you're good enough, right? So
Yeah.
What is that story? What's that story about? So I think that with the imposter syndrome, it's really important for us to control our imposter syndrome and say, yes, we are worth it. Yes. And recognize why we are doing what we are doing. Right. So for me, the inner critic and the imposter syndrome are connected. So in the past webinar, I talked about that connection. So RJ, what did you think about that? Remember you being really struck with it.
I couldn't agree more, actually. I almost think they're close to being synonyms or parallels. The inner critic creates an imposter syndrome. And tying in all three of these, 1, 2, and 3, it seems like the only antidote is truly having a strong value or strength set, or at least knowing your weaknesses. Is that true? Is that one antidote to the inner critic or imposter
also
syndrome?
Understanding your dark side, right? So for management and leadership, understand what really inspires you, understand what makes your team also become very vibrant and how you might support them. Think of the inner critic and the imposter syndrome and how it shows up in your team as well, and within your organization too. So I love the learning zone model because oftentimes people are in their comfort zone, supported by the inner critic or the imposter syndrome. But then when they're uncomfortable and learning something, they are now in the learning zone. But when you move to your panic zone is when you stop learning and you freeze. So I didn't say this, Tom Senninger says it. So I want you to consider this model a little bit for thinking about how your strengths, your weaknesses, your inner critic, your imposter syndrome work to make you a better leader. So in my mind, you need to be in your learning zone. You need to recognize the symptoms of being in a panic zone.
Yeah.
And when you come back to your learning zone, you need to become comfortable with what you're learning in order for you to be in your comfort zone with the new learning. And then you add new learning and become uncomfortable again.
Beautifully put. beautifully rounded out. I was applauding because I assume everyone else watching this is also applauding after that wonderful round out of that. I love the fact that all of these things are related. And as we move on to this next slide about self-awareness, these questions that we have here, how do these relate to creating more of a strengthened self-awareness?
So if there are any other questions you have about them, so I think about all these questions. I always think about these questions when I want to think about what is happening to me as a manager or a leader or a follower. So I think about my values. I think about how congruent they are with my behavior. I think about how much my ego gets in the way of working with others. How do I relate to others? How does the inner critic and imposter syndrome show up for me? And what are my triggers? And I also think about what steps I need to take to become confident and self-aware, right? So are there any questions that you think are missing in here? And while people are writing in, I can see that people have talked about the inner critic, the imposter syndrome creates humility, but you should. So Priscilla has said, imposter syndrome creates humility, but you should also allow humility to drive you to learn and grow.
Yeah.
That's really great.
That's really
So
great.
understanding your boundaries is what Mariah is saying is really important. So I think you have to say so many things about these things. We are fearful. These times are so difficult right now. So we always feel inadequate, and we should be feeling inadequate because knowledge is changing, ever changing. And so I think when we feel inadequate, we have to stop and say, how are we going to do what we are going to do, and in what way it's going to support the team.
We actually have a question here, actually, that's very specific to what we're looking at now. From Huntley. Sadhana, on personal reflections, where is the question about, are you right with respect to where you want to lead the group?
So are you right with respect where you want to lead the group? Meaning, where do you think you're right, Huntley? Hunt, what's the question? I think it's you.
Yeah. Huntley, are you right with respect to where you want to lead the group? I assume, do you know what your respect is supposed to be before you continue leading the group? He'll respond with that.
Yes.
And as he does respond with that, we love to see other questions, just so we can expand upon them.
Sure. So I really definitely want to look at the next slide, which is Tuckman stages of group development. And Hunt, I think this might address this for you. Perfect. Right? So when I look at leadership and management, I always think about how the groups are working. So let me just quickly define the difference between leadership and management, as Warren Bennett says. So management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right thing. So in this Tuckman stages of development, I really want you to start thinking about how your group really starts improving and growing together towards a common mission. So I want to take the example of the Republican debate, the Democratic debate that the Dartmouth ran, which was campus-wide, had over 200 people. And I also want to take an example of a conference that we did for 1,600 people with people, and which was video conference at 220 sites around the world. So what we saw in the beginning is the group that came along. These were new projects. They were either campus-wide or they were for the organization for the global conference. People who were managing these things were unfamiliar with it, unfamiliar with each other. And it was important for everyone to create an intellectually supportive environment. And by that, I mean an environment that is full of respect, full of the ability of somebody to listen and someone to talk. And we want to listen to understand, not to refute. And that's what basically happened with the first part. The group was unfamiliar. You had to create an intellectually supportive environment. The second piece was people knew what they needed to do, but there was role confusion. So these are the stages of group development that I'm talking, which leads to a team, basically. So there were conflicts and people did not feel the psychological safety to come. And by that, I mean the trust that you need to have to come and speak to supervisors or people who are working together. So the role really became in this stage to facilitate, clarify roles, delegate, coach, and mentor people, right? So your job, if you're doing this, needs to happen needs to be to understand the stages through which people are going through. So the third stage was where people started truly seeing, oh my God, I see the possibilities. And they started developing a group mindset. Roles and responsibilities became clear. And all of a sudden, your role became a coach and mentor. And when I say your role, it was just literally my experience of working in this way. So you had a question.
I assume that norming is where the majority of your time is spent as a leader. Is this the area where the forming and the storming might be small blips, but then the norming is where you actually realize what the project is?
Absolutely. So you understand the team norms, you understand how you're going to work together, you understand where you're going to address the projects, you understand how you will in fact bring joy into the workplace. And joy with the project, the excitement with the project, right?
Yeah.
This is where I give a shout out to all the teams I worked in. When you do it this way and you start watching and observing the team, you really start understanding what you need to do to inspire them to a better place, right?
Yeah.
And most of it, I've noticed in the norming and performing stages are recognizing people. So your role, you can see when we get to the performing level, you oversee, you're a coach, and you give positive and constructive feedback, right? Then the project happens. It's magical. You see people laughing. You see people smiling about the work they've done. And here is an indicator that the project is owned by people. They will say, I did this. And they will also say, it was my role, it was my goal, and it was our project. So those things is what you would look for as a manager and a leader.
Which leads back to your quote of leadership is about you, but it's also not about you. You empowering those other people to say their role and it being a team instead of an I situation, which is really great. It's a great diagram, honestly.
So honestly, I wanted the Tuckman stages are 5, and adjourning is when the project is completed, you complete transition plans, you recognize team efforts. I cannot emphasize enough that you must recognize team efforts. And also your role is to help teams create the transition plans, right? But then there's this magical moment when that project has happened, and then there's this sad moment of loss, because all of a sudden, everything you worked for, everything that you tried to do, that project ended. And it's really crazy. So Rebecca is saying this diagram would perfectly describe the group that completed my organization's strategic planning process. We could feel the stages of group development. So I invite all of you, really, please look at these, just analyze and reflect on that. And then Anna is saying, once one understands the only constant thing in life is the change, then they become more aware of themselves and be open to learning new things. Also enhancing the old skills and being welcome to help their teams to learn and overcome imposter syndrome and the skills, knowing that they can always learn and become better. Oh my gosh, look at Keely. She is jumping in and saying, yes, Sadhana, when the debates came to an end. Thank you, Keely, for attending. We really mourned, didn't we? It was so sad because
I'm upset I didn't get to see these debates.
oh my God, Republican and Democrat debates were fantastic because it was not the ideology we were following. It was what we wanted for people to express, political candidates to express.
It was more about the teamwork than the person.
Yes, and Nkosana, I am so happy to see you. Where are you anyway? Goodness, it looks like there are people from all over the world, and I suddenly noticed that my sister also is here. Thank you for coming. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and you figured this out. That's wonderful. So,
In
Dad,
the interest of not keeping your sister up too late, let's move into teamworks.
there you go. See, he's
With the
also
Republicans, yeah.
me. So we've already talked about management versus leadership,
Yeah.
right? Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right thing. Now, listen, my friends, leadership is showing up 24/7. Let me give you an example of how you've shown up for me today. So many of you send me emails. So many of you are here, first of all, virtually. Then so many of you send me emails saying, so Sadhana, I'm so sorry I can't come, but I'll watch the recording. You showed up. Some of you said, oh, I can't come right now, but I'm going to join somewhere later. You showed up for me. Leadership is showing up. And some of the people even said, I have my kids' hockey match. But seriously, Sadhana, I'll be thinking about you. You showed up for me. What do you think it does when people acknowledge something like this for you? What do you think it does?
It gives it credibility. It makes it real. It gives integrity, to be honest.
Honestly, and it makes me feel respected, honestly. And I was so excited and pumped that people really listen to this message from our Rocky programming or people who have known me. You know, leadership is showing up. Why don't we do that?
And what happens when it goes wrong? So moving into number 2 with conflict management, when leadership fails, is this when conflict management comes in?
Right. So when we talk about conflict management, we are talking about differences of opinion. We are talking about our egos coming in the way. So in my mind, we really need to start thinking about how it is that we disagree with people. We disagree. We agree we disagree, but let's not be disagreeable.
Which is related to styles, how a person might run themselves within a team.
Exactly. And so here's a great exercise that I want you to think about. And some of you have already done this in our programming. So there are people who think in a broad vision in a team. There's some people who think about, I want to do it. I want to do it now. And then there's some people who just drive you crazy sometimes if you're a broad thinker, where they say, where's the cake? Where are the details? What do I need to do? Why is the bus not here? When you're thinking about a broad thing. And the final one are people who think about the process and they go, RJ doesn't feel like he's being listened to. Sonu is not the one who is being listened to. Let's open up spaces. So somebody who is a manager and a leader, and I don't care in this instance, in a team setting, all of us have to work together to create an environment where everyone works together with all these styles. But when these styles we don't address that, it creates irritation in people.
And how do we do that effectively? How do we create the rules in order to make a team work well effectively?
Super. So let me give you a specific example. You can have a discussion with your team. What do you think your style is? And there are very specific ways and tools and instruments that allow you to do this. You can talk to them and just say, oh my goodness, all right, I didn't realize, RJ, that you get really irritated when I talk about details, right? Or I didn't realize that, it's really important for you to do it now, So that discussion needs to happen within a team. And when it does, it's amazing. So I also think as a leader and a manager, you have to understand pacing. So here's a good example. And I will never forget this. One of my employees gathered enough courage to come and say to me, Sadhana, you always come to me and you always say, it should take you only 5 minutes. It should just take you 5 minutes. Now, I'm a quick thinker. I can put stuff together like this. And I didn't realize that it wouldn't take her 5 minutes. And here's her explanation. She said, for what takes you 5 minutes, possibly takes me 2 hours. But in so doing, you are making me feel disrespected. So words matter. We need to be really careful about how we are assigning tasks, or even as a team member, understand the pace at which people are working.
Sadhana, you have so smoothly transitioned to the next slide, describing your employee giving you feedback. I think that's actually the exact example that we would need to explain this entire slide, to be honest. Did you want to walk through what this SBIR and how that employee used this structure in order to say that to you?
Right. So she came and she described the situation, right? Like, Sadhana, you come to my office, you talk to me about a project, and you always tell me it's only going to take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Your behavior is excited. You tell me this is how it will happen, and I can do it. But the impact it has on me is it makes me really disrespected. And the result really is that I feel my inner critic jumps in. So RJ, you just put me in a spot, but seriously, this is exactly how that particular part would play out for me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that also in line with it is feedback that needs to be specific. I don't like the way you do this is not enough in a workplace. And so I think as a team, if we are growing, we have to be very, very specific. Whatever project we are doing, when you did this, I felt this, and this is what I need you to do. These are the 5 steps you need to take. Now, my husband gets really crazy when I say 3 things, 2 things, but for anything. And honestly, our mind has so many ideas. And if you focus people on 3 or 4 things that they need to be thinking about, and you give them specific feedback on how they can improve, that is fabulous. And Brian is saying, giving feedback is difficult and uncomfortable, but it is necessary for growth. I couldn't agree more. So honestly, feedback is a gift, I think. It is a gift. Use your words carefully, find the place carefully so you're not publicly shaming anybody. And it's really important that you spend the time to give specific feedback, reflect on it. Think about this word, reflect. You need to reflect, reflect, and reflect. And yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of this actually, aside from it only being good blueprint to become a leader, a lot of it, as cheesy as this is going to sound, also it helps you become a better person. Specifically this feedback loop, this feedback slide, the teamwork, the self-awareness. And before we move into organization, how does the individual, the team build in to the organization and make the organization a strong leader? You know what I'm saying? Which moves us to this next slide, actually, at the same time.
Right. So look at all these things, right? Context matters. Please, everybody, think about context and think about your own context in which you show up, your team shows up. And when I said show up, I gave you an example of how people showed up for me today, right? But how does your team show up? How do you individually show up? How it connects to societal good or the vision and the mission of the organization becomes really important. So I am going to talk about systems here, right? Try and make systems absolutely routine so that you can make the space for new ideas and generating new ideas. So what do I mean by that? I just mean that you need to have administrative systems. For example, your filing systems, they should be so quick for anybody to access anything. And if somebody's leaving, they don't tinker with the administrative system. We have to have the discipline of actually maintaining them. So there are many such systems, HR systems, administrative system, financial systems have a blueprint, really, and with the view to continuous quality improvement. So evaluation and assessment becomes really important. 360 feedback, yes, for team members is absolutely important, but it requires trust. All right. So I'm jumping back to systems. The first time a person makes a mistake, it's a mistake. The second time a same person makes a mistake, it's a systems issue. The third time they make a mistake, it's purely unprofessional. I don't care whether you're a manager or a leader or a team member, a follower within this organizational setup. So when I think about organizations, we have to have these types of systems in place.
And it looks like you chose one of these many dots as something you wanted to expound upon, but all of these have their own positioning within an organization, right? And you just systems to you listed as something that allows these other red dots to exist, context and vision and goal, once you have a system.
Absolutely. So I think that there are systems, but however, I just also believe that, so all of us are responsible for our culture, right? So organizationally, from top to bottom, I think people should be very clear about what makes the culture of that organization and how it shows up. So I know that we have hierarchical and we have flat structures nowadays, and we have different combinations of structures. We have virtual and we have other types of organizational setup. But what is really important is for us to show up with humility, grace, courage, and include and improve the environment for others. And we should be defining as leaders what that looks like for people.
That's beautiful, Sadhana. And moving into this last slide here, the one of circle of influence and circle of concern, I assume the leader who is garnering that culture needs to have a clear mind. Is that a lot what this slide is describing essentially?
Okay, what it's really describing for me is, please, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, check your ego at the door and stay in your circle of influence. Because if you don't stay in your circle of influence, which is what you have influence over, you will lose that circle of influence over time, because you will be spending a lot of time in your circle of concern. But if you stay, it stays large, right? So if you're in your circle of influence, it becomes bigger. If you stay in your circle of concern, things that you don't have any control over, that is when you end up having a smaller circle of influence. Stephen Covey talks about this, and I've seen this play out in so many organizations It's not true, because if you stay in your circle of concern, you just end up gossiping.
Yeah. And nobody likes a gossip unless it's about someone else.
Right.
This has been, again, every time I do this, I learn even more. I'm taking notes as we continue through. I'll wait on my copy of the book. I'm going to round this out. Essentially, I know we're right at 6:02, and if anyone has to go, feel free, but we thank you for coming. I wanted you to have the opportunity to sort of put a pin in this and sort of summarize how you feel. And if we have time, Joanne, let us know if we have time for questions. But in this summary, maybe describe again why leadership is important.
So we live in a really troubled world. If we don't lead and manage in the way we talked about, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing, I do believe that we don't reach our fullest potential as individuals, as members of teams, as organizations, to achieve a better and a just world. And I use the just idea of a just world really, really strongly. And I really encourage everybody to study whether they'd like to study about how they show up in a workplace, what their skills are, what their values are, what their strengths are, how the imposter syndrome and the inner critic plays for them. When they feel so panicked that they are paralyzed, how to deal with uncomfortable situations and work with other cultures. And I also think that we also need to think about how these organizations that we are a part of should start working together across sectors. So that's a larger dream, and it's a topic for another conversation.
And it takes a leader to bring those things together. Thank you so much, Sadhana. And speaking of thank yous, let's go to this next slide of gratitude. This took a lot of people to make it happen. Sadhana, I thank you again for allowing me to talk to you. I'm going to pass this over to Joanne, and you guys will round this thing up.
Sadhana, RJ, can you guys see me?
Yes,
Sure can.
Awesome. I am pinch hitting the close.
Okay.
Our colleague, Joanne Belay, is having some Zoom technical difficulties. So I'm Bob Costin, the Assistant Director here at the Rockefeller Center. And on behalf of our large virtual audience, Sadhana and RJ, thank you to you both and to the panelists for this evening's program. It was nothing but a dynamic conversation about leadership blueprints. So thank you to you both, and thank you to the panelists. And thanks to all those who attended this evening. Our next event is a program tomorrow night at 5 p.m. in the Life Sciences Room 200 that we're co-sponsoring with the Society for Fellows and the Department of Government. Speaking will be essayist and critic Bill Derezwitz, I believe I've got that right, author of Excellent Sheep. And thank you all, and thanks for being here tonight. We'll see you next week.
Well, thank you all. Well, hello, everyone. I'm really, really excited to come back again after the webinar, because it gave me a chance to reflect on what you said. And I noticed that there was so much activity on the chat that I didn't have the chance to really respond to all of you. And also, I also left some things unsaid. So this is what it is. It's the final reflection after a webinar, the said and the unsaid. So I feel like we had such an interesting discussion, and I want to thank RJ. I want to thank all the attendees, and I want to thank all the attendees to come. So you're welcome to send me emails about your thoughts as well. We had such an interesting discussion. So we started with values, what was important to us, and self-awareness. And I said integrity is a matter of your word, nothing more, nothing less. To me, it always begins with your word. And I agree that integrity is the congruence of thoughts, words, and deeds. In my mind, it's expressed this way. These are not my words, but they have been attributed to too many people. That's why I'm just going to share the quote with you.
What your thoughts, they become your words. What your words, they become your actions. What your actions, they become your habits. What your habits, they become your character. What your character, it becomes your destiny. And I think to me, it shows the power of the thoughts, the words, and the congruence of all this right to your destiny. So I hope the point that I was trying to make to all of you about values comes across in the webinar. We should all have clear definitions for values that we live by. We should also know which ones are non-negotiable. I just mentioned 4 values that are important to me in a work context and who I am as a person. Additionally, I hold others that are dear to me as well, such as family. I love family. Having fun. People who know me know I love to have fun. Being resilient and having courage to make difficult decisions. These are other values I hold, and there are many more. But I think non-negotiable values within a work context are very, very important. And next, we floated to this crazy discussion on the inner critic. I am telling you, I got so much feedback on this. People were so grateful to talk about this. And thank you so much for sending me emails about it. So I just wanted to quickly round out some of the thoughts I wasn't able to cover in the chat, and some of them are right here. So we should think about Tina's post about the inner critic within us, which makes us feel that we are not good enough. Amy said that the inner critic can paralyze a person, whereas Hunt said he likes his inner critic. It does not keep him back, it makes him review things. So in my mind, both these ideas are correct. And when you view how they fall within the learning zone that we discussed, I feel like the inner critic, when it paralyzes a person, and I've seen it happen a lot, that's when a person is in their panic zone. And when it is making a person think, review, and grow, as Hunt is saying, that's when I think people are in their learning zone and they're growing. So we know that these things are important to us. We always will have an inner critic, but how we manage our inner critic is really important to me. And I wanted to share that with you because I am seeing anxiety escalate to proportions that is so worrisome for all of us. And I believe that the inner critic, the imposter syndrome, and which zone you are in really has to do with how anxious you are also. Just a thought for your consideration. So I know that Carol Dweck also differentiates between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And I believe that we need to think about this idea as well as it deals with the inner critic, as it relates to the inner critic and also the imposter syndrome and the learning zone model. Why? Because I think it points out to a path of adopting lifelong learning and becoming a lifelong learner, something that we really need nowadays because our knowledge really is changing so fast. Then I think I really like some of the recommendations about how to deal with the inner critic. Sky asked us to identify a specific point of failure and work on it rather than sitting in shame. Roshni shared this advice: self-kindness is not a weakness, but a strength. Love it. And Tomasz was very elegant when he asked us to consider this word, gratitude. He said, remind yourself of the positive things you've done and all the positive things that have happened to you. I think these are some of the thoughts that really ran through my mind, and I just wanted to share them with you as well as I read the chat. You can tell I'm really excited with the webinar still. So next, we talked about the Tuckman stages of development, and this is for group development and team development. Yes, I think that we really do need to recognize what stage our team is at any given moment and find ways to get it moving to the next level. And honestly, I really believe that it's not positional leadership that does this. When teams recognize that they're getting stuck, it's a way to get them to work together to get unstuck. And we should have that common value with us, amongst us. Certainly my team does, and I'm so excited to see that play out every single time when we are in a different project and a different stage of development. So many things to say about team and teamwork, but there are two things that stick out to me. Please, let's build psychological safety through collective articulation of the team's values and norms. So our team has articulated their values and norms, and we visit them regularly and often, and particularly when a new person comes in. So that ties, I think, a group together. And virtual or not, check in with how people are feeling and how they are managing. Have regular facilitated team meetings with an agenda and make it routine for team members to talk about successes and challenges. And let's build in recognition for a task and project well done. Understand also how people like to be recognized. And finally, I think we should be thinking about ways in which we can foster team satisfaction, productivity, efficiency, and performance, and overall wellness. Now, our team has a leader who makes us think, at least, about wellness all the time. And it is, I think, a reminder to me to start walking, doing something, because I know I will get this reminder from the team member through Slack channels, and you know who you are. So I've always found the use of thank you, sorry, I don't know, I'll find out and get back to you very useful in a team setting. So think about all these things and how they apply to you and your organization and your teams. So the final thing is about organizations. So Fritz pointed out that management and leadership are two different things. And from my experience, Warren Bennis and Bert Nanis were also right when they said management is doing things right and leadership is doing the right thing. And I agree with Fritz when he says it's amazing how many managers don't do things right and how many leaders don't do the right thing. That's why this little phrase sticks with me. And we have to come up with examples and experiences within us and talking to others and understand whether we are doing things right and whether we are doing the right thing. So for me, I like to think of good managers having a specific set of technical skills and competencies which bring about order and consistency within an organization. And good leadership helps with change and movement. So ultimately, both work towards getting the job done. So in these uncertain times, while positional leaders have the power, authority, and influence to set the tone for an organization's culture, systems, and performance, I believe a vibrant leadership model is one in which everyone knows how to lead themselves, how to work within an organization to meet its mission. So, of course, the spirit of continuous quality improvement should always haunt us. And if it's allowed to permeate through an organization, I think it makes it a vibrant learning organization. So when individuals, their teams, and their teams within organizations are tied to the organization's vision and mission, great things can and do happen. And when an organization demonstrates in its culture, a commitment of personal, professional, and organizational growth in the way RJ, you, and I, all of you in the webinar and I discussed, I do believe great things happen. So this is just a random thought for your consideration. If you are a positional leader identified through the hierarchy of your organization, please consider ways in which you are clear about your vision and your organization's mission. Please recognize and reward employees, help employees to advance, and delegate tasks which make employees shine. So one of our speakers famously says, please don't delegate things you don't like to do. That's part of your job description to somebody else. So I agree with that because I know way back in early in my career, I used to do that, and that's not very useful, is it? Not very helpful, I think. So I think all of this boils down to empathy, leading by example within and across an organization. Pay attention to informal leaders as well. People follow them because of their technical competence, their wisdom, their experience, and the respect they show towards others. I end here this quick discussion and reflection because I want you to think about this within an organizational context. Often attributed to Maya Angelou, let's think about this. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how they made you feel. So leadership is about you and it's not about you. I wish you all the best, joy, happiness, and success. Take care.